The Joe Rogan Experience.
But back to your core point, I mean, that's the reason why I also write science fiction, is that the world of science is changing so fast that we really need to apply a lot of imagination to imagine where it's going. Because if you're just looking at what's happening now, it's like this train is going to speed by you. We have to kind of imagine. It's like Wayne Gretzky. We have to imagine where the puck is going to be, not where it is now. And I mentioned George Church, he's at Harvard. He's like the living Charles Darwin. And I do a lot of speaking alongside George. And it's become our little thing that he says that he reads science fiction like mine, and then and says, well, that's pretty cool. How can we do that? And what I do is I look at the research coming out of labs like George's, and I say, all right, well, that's where we are now. What's that going to mean in 20, 50, 100 years? And so we have to, the science fiction plays a more important role than it ever has in kind of imagining where we're going. And it's that imagining that allows us to try to say, well, what if that's one of the options of where we're going? What are the decisions that we need to make now so that we can have a better outcome rather than a worse one?
If you're a gambling person, I don't know if you are, but if I had to give you $100 to put on something in 20 years that's going to be profoundly just it's going to change us in a way that is something that we're not really prepared to understand or deal with. What do you think that's going to be?
I think it's going to be predictive genetics. That we're going to have right now, it's like you go to your doctor when you're sick. This could have been some genetic disorder that you had from the moment you were conceived.
And it was ticking.
And you showed up 50 years later when that's been manifest. So it's going to be very different. You're taking your kid home from the hospital, your newborn. And the doctor says, hey, congratulations, this is really great. But just FYI, your kid has a 50% greater than average chance of getting early onset Alzheimer's 50 years from now. And your kid has a really great chance of being phenomenal at abstract math. Like, how are we going to think about that? How are we going to think about what it means to be human when we have all of that information? And there are things now that we call fate. And it's just a different model. And so I think that, and once we have that, that's going to change a lot of things. It's going to fundamentally transform our healthcare. What we call healthcare now is really sick care. You show up with a symptom. And this is going to be predictive. And it's going to change the way we make babies, because people are going to have real choices about which embryos to implant, and we're going to have a lot of information about a lot of really intimate stuff. So
you feel like genetic manipulation and genetic engineering, genetic understanding, genetic knowledge, and then applied genetic medicine.
Yes.
Those are going to be the big changes in the next 20 years, even more so than technology.
Well, it's interconnected, because it's like a super convergence of these technologies. So the genetics revolution is the artificial intelligence revolution, in the sense that the complexity of genetics is so great. It's way beyond what our brains on their own could process. And so really, all these technologies are touching each other. And so the biological models are now influencing the AI. So for example, we are coming to the limits of silicon storage, but DNA has unlimited storage capacity. So it's as I've said before, the boundaries between biology and AI, or genetics and AI, is going to be very blurry.
Yeah, that is an interesting concept, right? The idea of storing information in DNA,
right.
And that has been discussed.
Yeah, well, DNA is the greatest information storage mechanism ever imagined.
But the question is, what happens when you do store things in there, and how does that information interact with all the rest of the stuff that's in your body already?
Well, I mean, if you can do it in your body, it doesn't have to be in your body. But just think of your DNA has 4 billion years of history, and it's done a great job of recording it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Like I have old 8-track tapes. They haven't lasted.
That is a squirrely concept, that you have all that data inside your head. I mean, that's also when people when they try to understand instincts that people have, that these are some sort of genetically encoded memories, or some understanding of things that are dangerous, and that they're in there because this is how we've learned over the years without actually having to experience these things personally.
Yeah. No, so it's baked in. Our genetics are baked into us. And so I don't know if you've been to Indonesia before. I was in Indonesia, and I went to this place called Komodo Island.
Oh, wow. Where the dragons
are? It's the Komodo dragons are. And it was fascinating because it's like, you can tell they don't have plaintiff's attorneys. So you're just walking around. There are all these Komodo dragons. And so, yeah, these are like the most deadly creatures on earth. And there's like some little guy with a little stick. And it's like, well, how effective is that stick? But the way it works...
So you're just walking around?
You're just walking around. Because the Komodo dragons, when they're not killing people or killing animals, they're just sitting there.
Oh,
and so,
Jesus
so it's pretty scary.
Do they ever get jacked? Do people ever go there and get bitten?
Yes, and they say, oh, it's only a few times a year. It's like, well, a few times a year, that seems like a lot. A few
times a year is a lot.
Anyway, but the way it works for a Komodo dragon, a mother lays the egg and then buries the egg and then forgets where the egg is. And then, let's just say that this egg hatches and this little Komodo dragon comes out and the mother sees her own baby Komodo dragon. She'll eat it in a second.
Oh, Jesus.
And so if you're a Komodo dragon, you better have your entire survival strategy baked into your DNA because nobody's teaching you anything. And so for us, we have this sense that it's like parenting is really important. It is. Environment is really important. It is. But so much of who and what we are is baked into our genetics. And I think that's going to be this challenge. We're going to see ourselves as increasingly genetic beings. We can't become genetic determinists, think that we're just genetics, but we're going to know a lot more. We're going to demystify a lot of what it means to be a human.
Poof.
Yeah. Proof is right.
But are we going to lose the romance and the just the randomness of life because of that? Yeah. That's what people are concerned with, right?
Yeah.
Like if we have some sort of genetic uniformity, I mean, especially in particular with things like intelligence and athletic performance, we're not going to appreciate freaks as much.
Yeah, or maybe we'll all want to be freaks because
we're definitely all going to want to be freaks.
Because the freaks are the ones who push us. And so I think
you're not going to want to be a moron.
Yeah, well, your question, it's the essential question. It's like, what makes a human? A human isn't just someone with higher IQ. That doesn't make you a better human. That makes you someone with a higher IQ. But how are we going to think about constructing societies when it's up to us? Like, if we are going to say we value certain people, certain ideas, I think we're going to need artists. Like right now, people like artists are sometimes in the mainstream, sometimes they're on the fringe, but artists are going to be maybe the most important people in this new world. And right now in hospitals, we have kind of a hierarchy. And like the most technical people are the people who are valued the most. And the least technical people, like some of the nurses or nurses' aides, are the people who are often valued and paid the least. But when technology can do these technological feats, what's going to be left is how can we be great humans? How can we emote? How can we connect? How can we create art? And if we get swept away by this tide of science, and you know how excited I am about the science, but we could really undermine our humanity.
Right, and as for humans, what humans value is many aspects of that humanity: the art, the creations, the literature, things. We when you read someone's great prose, you're reading like an insight into their mind, and that's what's interesting about it, right?
Yeah.
You're like,
yes,
you're not going to get that from just ones and zeros.
Yeah, and there will always be this, we call it mystery, and even if we can do a genetic analysis of Shakespeare and Mozart and whatever, like it's still miraculous, and we need to celebrate that, and we can't allow us to say that we are just our genetics or even just our biology, but we also can't just say biology has nothing to do with it, and especially because we're going to know more about our biology and about our differences, and that's normal. I mean, it used to be in the old days that everyone thought, well, God is weather. And now we understand weather pretty much, and nobody's saying, oh, that lightning, that's God delivering
Thor.
A message. It could be, but we still have that mystery. And I think that it's in some ways it's about our orientation. Like, how do we make sure that we keep this view of life, that we have artists and humanists who are just at the core of this conversation about where we're going?
What if that mystery ultimately turns out to just be ignorance, and that as you develop more and more understanding, there's less and less mystery? Would we like to be less smart? Would we like to be more overwhelmed by possibility? I mean,
it could be. I think
could that be part of what romance is?
It could be, and certainly like the unknown. We wake up every morning, and we just don't know the answer. And there are some people, like going back to the issues of life extension. There are some people who say Well, that death is essential for appreciating life. I talk about this stuff all around. And then there are people who say, you're talking about eliminating these terrible diseases, but I know somebody who had that terrible disease, and their suffering was a gift to everybody else because we all had more humanity in response to their suffering. I was like, well, that's kind of screwed up. I'd prefer them to not have that suffering, but
those people are thinking wacky.
It's wacky. But we need to, I totally agree with you that if we allow ourselves to get swept away with this kind of scientific determinism, if we don't say we really value our humanistic traditions, our artists, our cultures, we could get lost. And
we could become obsolete.
We could become obsolete, but we could also just become less human. And there's something wonderful, and there's magic.
But do you think that monkeys used to think, man, I can't become a human, we become less monkey?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
But no being looks in the mirror and recognizes that they are evolving. We've only been Homo sapiens for about 300,000 years.
Right.
So it's hard. We know where we've come from because you see all those little charts from high school biology. But it's really hard for people to imagine being something else in the future. It's outside of our consciousness. And so
it's H.G. Wells squared.
Yeah. And we are monkeys. It's just that we've redefined our monkey thing. We do it with a little different way.